Some of the stories are hard to tell, but I tell them because I feel like other people have gone through similar things. And if they can just know that they're not alone, then that's a win for me. But I think the stories of how I was viewed as a woman go all the way back to stories I was told about my mom's pregnancy. I was told that when my mom was pregnant with me, she would accidentally cut herself on razors and knives, and that she was very sick, and that somehow that had to do with me. I think there was this idea that, if I remember correctly, they were living in a missionary's house while he was maybe overseas, and they were, living in it then. And there was some kind of like African masks in the attic, and they attribute it to being like demonic and like causing this. And so as a young child, I'm being told like, you caused your mom basically to suffer because demons were like interested in you during the pregnancy. But then I was told stories about like when I came out of the womb, I was told that I looked around and I had these dark eyes. My eyes were like a lot darker when I was a baby. And I was told that my grandmother thought that I was saying kind of in my mind, I don't know if it was a joke, but it was communicated to me in a way that was said multiple times. They felt like I came out of the womb looking at all the adults and saying, I can conquer you and you and you.
What?
And so even if it's a joke, it's like this idea that me as a woman, I am trying to usurp the authority as I'm leaving the birth canal.
As a newborn.
Yeah. And then they told me, and I found out about this later. I think it was when my dad was teaching like a Sunday school class, and talked about it without my permission. They said I used to cry as a baby, that I would cry a lot at night. And so they thought maybe I had a demon. And so they prayed over me that the demons would leave, and basically had an exorcism.
What?
Because I was a baby and infant crying. Even before you're out of the womb, they're already attributing like evil happening because of your presence. Whether they tell that in a way that's serious or whether they tell it in a way that it's just like, oh, the family just knows this kind of thing. It changes you as a child, and it lets you know how the adults in your life think about you as a girl child. I do not remember hearing stories like that about my brothers. I do not remember hearing stories about that. So obviously I don't have those memories because I was too young, but those were things that were told to me on multiple occasions. But then kind of into, I guess it probably would have been like preschool age, about 4, they were always saying that I was rebellious. And in the IFB, rebellious has like its own definition. Rebellion is like the sin of witchcraft. Witchcraft is alliance with the devil. Alliance with the devil gets you thrown into hell. It's a whole. So when someone says you're rebellious, it means something deeper than just, oh, you're rebellious. Like, interestingly enough, there's a lot of talk about how good the rebellion was when it comes to the Civil War. There's a lot of talk about that in the South. And so a lot of things don't match up. But I was told I was being rebellious, and my parents left. I was given the impression that they needed to go away and have a break because I was too much to handle. And so I stayed with my grandparents while they were gone, and my grandfather took me down to the basement. We call it the 4th bedroom, and locked me in there for hours. Mm-hmm. And he says he didn't do anything, but my body still feels the trauma, the experience of feeling like I wanted to fight. He said he had bruises on his chest for me as a 4-year-old. So whether that's real or not, I don't know, but that's what he said. I experienced the desire to flee, but the door was locked. And ultimately I froze. And I remember after hours, I was like, I'm just giving into this because I knew I could not survive this life without submitting. And so then I turned to fawn, all 4 trauma responses, and I tried to please and appease to get safe. And there's some memories that I have fuzziness around, and so I have other fears of what happened. But I do know that whatever happened, it was very traumatic, and it was a changing day for me. And after that experience, I remember he took me to Kroger, which was like I think it was Kroger or Harris Teeter, one of the grocery stores. And he bought me a white carnation flower and red food coloring. And we took it home, put it in a vase, and he added the food coloring. And he said, as the stem drank up the red water and changed the color of the white carnation, that was a symbol of my change into being a submissive girl. And that moment did change my life. I knew in my body I wasn't safe. I knew now what could happen if I stepped out of line and was too rebellious. That story was brought up over and over again as a joke at family gatherings. And grandfather would tell men I was interested in, I'm the first one who got Ashley to submit. And finally, like after I was married, my husband had to tell him, like, you can't tell that story anymore. That is not funny. And then they act shocked. Like, why would she be offended by this?
Right. Because they think it's a good thing.
Right. Right. So they're looking at me being quote unquote rebellious, which I think is probably just normal childhood development where you're differentiating yourself from your parents and trying to explore. And I was living in such a strict environment. My intuition knew very early on that something was like, it felt off, you know, like I couldn't articulate it as a child, but my body knew. But you're also having, in addition to all these rules, other things my grandfather would do is he knew I had this comfort blanket. I called her Blanky. And it was funny because she had like a seam on one of the corners, and I pretended that was the head and those were the lips. She had a wing and two tails, and like it was like a whole thing. This is like my favorite blanket, my only security, the thing that I would sleep with every night. And I did even into my teenage years because I was trying to find comfort. And as a really young child, he knew how important that was to me. And he would torture me. He would take that blanket and he would throw it out the door and watch me cry while he left. Even outside of the other rules, you're also having things that aren't even rules causing you to feel like you don't deserve anything good and that it can be snatched away in a moment, and that as a woman, you don't have power in this. And if you're going to survive, you've got to submit. Eventually, that's what I did. I bought into the ideology hook, line, and sinker. As a teen, I wrote a book called Keeping House While Keeping Sane, which is on one hand very hilarious that a 16, 17-year-old wrote this book on housekeeping. And on the other hand, very sad because what other 16 or 17-year-old has that as their focus of something they'd want to write about?
Right.
But I also started a blog called Stay at Home Daughter, where I blog to like 3,500 women about adherence to the patriarchy and about submission and about obeying your parents. And there were people who said they read my blog and they decided to quit their jobs and submit to their parents. And I was a teenager, then turning into a young adult. I think I stopped blogging when I was 21 on that blog, but that is how much I then bought into it. And I kind of internally decided if I'm going to survive this, I have to be able to work within this system. If I'm not allowed to preach, well, I can sing. If I'm not allowed to teach, I can write. If I can't teach men, I can write a blog to women. If I'm supposed to have these womanly roles, I'm going to do something like be a blogger and have a nanny job so I can focus on womanly things and try to be successful there. I was always trying to find ways to overcome my position, but within the system, because that's all I knew.